Imagine you are standing in a stone courtyard somewhere in the ancient world. The air is hot, the light is gold, and 3 feet in front of your bare toes, a king cobra is rising out of a basket. It does not slither away. It lifts higher, higher, until 1/3 of its body is standing straight up in the air, and its hood flares open like a black sail, and you are looking directly into the face of the longest venomous snake on Earth. 1 bite carries enough neurotoxin to kill an elephant. Enough to kill you in under an hour. And the man crouched beside it has no gloves, no armor, no weapon. He has a flute and a slow, swaying movement of his shoulders. You want to run. Every nerve in your body is screaming at you to run. But the man does not move away from the snake. He moves with it. And the cobra, the most feared predator in that entire region, does not strike. It sways too, side to side, locked onto him, as if the 2 of them are sharing a secret that no one else in the world is allowed to hear. For thousands of years, people watched this and reached the only conclusion that made sense to them. This man was not human. He was touched by the gods. He could speak to serpents. He could command death itself to dance. But here's what I want you to hold in your mind for the next 20 minutes. It was never magic, not once. Not for a single second. Every sway, every note, every inch of distance between that man and those fangs was calculated. These were not priests performing miracles. They were some of the first behavioral scientists who ever lived. And they had quietly figured out how to hack the nervous system of a creature that could kill them instantly. The question is how? How do you stand inches from the deadliest snake on the planet and walk away alive every single time? By the end of this, you will know the one thing that kept them breathing. And I promise you, it has nothing to do with the music. Stay with me. Because the truth is far stranger and far more brilliant than the legend. Let's go back. Roughly 2,000 years. In the deserts of North Africa lived a people the Greeks and Romans wrote about in tones of pure astonishment. They were called the Psylli. The historian Herodotus mentioned them. Centuries later, the Roman writer Pliny the Elder went further, and what he claimed is hard to believe even now. He wrote that the Psylli carried something in their bodies, a kind of poison of their own, that was deadly to serpents, that snakes could not bear to be near them, that a Psyllus could be bitten again and again and simply not die. And here's the detail that turned legend into something close to terror. The Romans believed the Psylli could test their own children. They would place a newborn baby near a venomous snake. If the child was truly of Psyllic blood, the snake would refuse to harm it. If the snake struck, well, then the child was not really theirs. Whether that ever happened, we genuinely do not know. The ancient sources loved a dark story, and this may be one of them. But the reputation was real, and it was powerful enough to reach the highest moment of drama in the entire ancient world. When Cleopatra died, when the last queen of Egypt pressed a venomous asp to her skin, there's a story that the Romans, desperate to keep her alive as a prize, sent for the Psylli, the snake charmers, the men who could suck the venom from a wound and pull a soul back from the edge. They arrived too late, or so the story goes. Now think about what that tells you. In a world of generals and emperors, when death itself walked into the room in the form of a snake, the most powerful men alive sent for the Serpent Whisperers. Not for soldiers, not for doctors. For them. So, who were they really? For a long time, the answer was simply gods. Chosen. Blessed. And it wasn't only North Africa. Travel east to the great temples of India and the kingdoms of Southeast Asia, and you find serpent handlers woven into the holiest places of all, carved into temple walls. The cobra lifted up as a divine being. The naga, the serpent spirit, coiled around the gods themselves. Different lands, different people, a different snake. The giant King Cobra of the eastern jungles, not the asp of the Egyptian sands. And yet, the same impossible craft appeared again and again. Men who could handle the unhandleable. That is the mystery. Because these cultures were separated by thousands of miles and never compared notes. So how did so many of them independently crack the same deadly puzzle? They must have all discovered the same hidden truth about the snake. To understand what that truth was, we have to stop looking at the man. We have to look at the cobra. Here's where everything you think you know falls apart. So pay attention to this part, because it's the key that unlocks the whole thing. The snake is not listening to the music. It can't. A cobra has no external ears. None. It cannot hear a flute the way you and I hear a flute. The melody drifting through that temple courtyard, the sound the crowd believed was casting a spell. To the cobra, it barely exists. I'll let that land for a second. For 2,000 years, the entire world believed snakes were charmed by sound. And the snakes were essentially deaf to it. So what is the cobra responding to? Movement. A snake reads the world through its eyes and through vibration in the ground. And when that charmer sways from side to side, the cobra's eyes lock onto the motion. The flute isn't an instrument, it's a decoy. A slow-moving object the snake fixes on and tracks, swaying to stay aimed at it. The way you might keep your eyes on a wasp circling your head, never letting it out of your sight. The cobra isn't dancing. It's doing the only thing a frightened animal knows how to do. It is keeping its enemy in view. That hood flared wide and terrifying. That's not aggression, that's fear. It's a defensive display. The cobra is making itself look enormous because it feels cornered, lifted out of its dark basket into blinding daylight, surrounded by noise and bodies. It is not hunting the man. It is bracing against him. And now we arrive at the single most important number in this entire story. The one secret I promised would keep them alive. A cobra can only strike about 1/3 of its own body length. That's it. That's the whole trick. That's the line between life and death. The master charmer knows in his bones exactly where that invisible line falls. He sits just beyond it. Always. When he sways within a hair of that boundary, close enough to mesmerize the crowd, far enough that the fangs cannot reach him. And if the snake lunges, it falls short every time, by inches the audience can barely see. To you watching from the crowd, it looks like the snake chooses not to bite. Like the man has tamed it. Like there's an understanding between them. There is no understanding. There is geometry. There is distance measured to the centimeter by a man who has watched 10,000 strikes and knows precisely how far death can travel. Now watch how the rest of it stacks on top of that. The slow, rhythmic sway does something else. A sudden movement triggers a snake to strike. Fast motion reads as threat. But slow, steady, predictable motion keeps the cobra in that hypnotized tracking state instead of a lunging one. The charmer's smooth rhythm is not a performance for the crowd. It's a way of keeping the snake's nervous system locked in defense mode instead of attack mode. So let's rebuild what's really happening in that courtyard. A deaf animal blinded by sunlight, lifted out of darkness, tracking a slow-moving stick, held just beyond the exact distance it can reach, kept calm by a rhythm engineered to never trigger a strike. That is not a miracle. That is one of the most sophisticated pieces of applied animal behavior in the ancient world. And these men worked it out with nothing but their eyes, their nerve, and a body count of everyone who got the distance wrong. But it gets stranger, because the snake was only half of what they were controlling. Here's what most people miss. The Serpent Whisperer wasn't only manipulating the cobra, he was manipulating you, the audience, the believers, and he was doing it with the same precision. Think about where these performances happened. Not in open fields, in temples, in stone courtyards, in enclosed sacred spaces with high walls and hard surfaces. Some researchers have pointed to the way those spaces sound. Bouncing echoes, a single flute swelling until it seems to come from everywhere at once. Light falling in narrow shafts so the snake glows and the man is half in shadow. We can't prove the ancient handlers designed this on purpose. The evidence is thin, and honest people should say so. But the effect is real. The architecture turned a careful piece of animal handling into something that felt like a visitation from another world. And then there's the question of the body, the Whisperer's own body. Remember Pliny's claim that the Psylli could be bitten and not die? Strip away the magic and you're left with something that may be partly true. Across history, a small number of people who handle venomous snakes constantly have shown signs of acquired resistance. Repeated tiny exposures nudging the immune system into building a defense. It is dangerous. It is not reliable. It does not make anyone immortal. But to a Roman watching a Silius shrug off a bite that would have killed a soldier, the line between partial tolerance and divine immunity would have vanished completely. There were other secrets too, darker ones, and honesty demands we name them. Not every serpent handler was a master of distance and rhythm. Many cheated. They pulled the snake's fangs out, they cut the venom glands. Some sewed the mouth partly shut so it could never fully open. A cobra handled this way is a broken, suffering animal that simply cannot deliver a fatal bite. And a fraud can sit on top of it and look like a god for the price of the snake's slow death. So there were really two kinds of men in that courtyard. The true masters who understood the animal so completely they didn't need to harm it. And the imitators who faked the mastery by mutilating the snake. From the crowd, you could not tell them apart. Both looked divine. Only one actually was something extraordinary. And this is the deepest layer of their power. The thing they controlled best of all was not the snake. It was fear. The crowd's fear, which they conducted like an orchestra. The gasp as the hood spread, the held breath as the man leaned in, the release as he survived. And their own fear, which they had learned to switch off entirely because a single flinch, one jolt of panic that pushed them an inch too close would have ended them. That is the real source of the legend. Not that they could speak to snakes, but that they had mastered the one thing every human being struggles with. The animal terror that floods your body when death is in front of you. They sat inside that terror, perfectly calm, and turned it into a performance. To a frightened world, a man who feels no fear of death looks exactly like a man the gods have chosen. But no craft built on a secret survives forever, and theirs was about to disappear. Now watch what happens next. The thing that destroyed the Serpent Whisperers was not a stronger snake or a rival magician. It was understanding. Slowly, over centuries, the world stopped seeing snakes as demons and gods and started seeing them as animals. Naturalists studied them. They learned that snakes were deaf to music. They measured strike distances. They worked out how venom actually moves through the body. And eventually, in the modern age, they made anti-venom. A vial of liquid that could do what the Psylli only claimed to do, and do it reliably. And once you can explain the trick, the magician dies. There was no need for a holy man who could survive a serpent when a doctor with a syringe could save anyone. The temples changed. The beliefs changed. The Serpent Whisperer, who had stood at the center of the sacred world, slid to its edges, to street corners and tourist roads where the craft curdled into a sad spectacle of defanged animals and cheap fear. The Psylli themselves simply faded out of history. One generation the Romans were sending for them in the most desperate hour imaginable. A few centuries later, they are a footnote, a half-remembered legend, a strange story about a people who could not be poisoned. We don't have their names. We don't have their methods written down in their own hand. Everything they knew, the distances, the rhythms, the reading of a snake's mood from the angle of its hood, was passed mouth to mouth, body to body. And when the last true master died without a student, it went into the ground with him. That's the quiet tragedy hiding underneath the spectacle. These men had assembled by hand, across countless deaths, a working science of one of the most dangerous animals on Earth. And almost none of it was ever written down. We didn't inherit their knowledge. We had to rediscover it from scratch with laboratories and high-speed cameras thousands of years later. And the snakes paid the price for the long misunderstanding. Feared as evil, killed on sight, mutilated for performances. The cobra, an animal that wants nothing more than to be left alone in the dark, became one of the most persecuted creatures of all. The same fear that made the Whisperer look like a god is the fear that, even now, gets these animals slaughtered. So the legend ends not with a bang, but with a fade. The flute goes quiet. The basket sits empty. And the secret that thousands of people once mistook for the voice of the gods turns out to have been, all along, a profound and patient understanding of a frightened animal. So, what do we actually take from the Serpent Whisperers now that we've pulled the mask off? 3 things. The first is the historical truth. The men who charmed the deadliest snakes on Earth were not blessed by any god. They were observers, patient, fearless, brilliant readers of animal behavior, who understood that a cobra cannot hear music, cannot strike past 1/3 of its length, and cannot help but track a slow and steady sway. They built a science with their lives as the laboratory. The second is a lesson about us. For thousands of years, we looked at something we did not understand and called it magic. We always do. The gap between "I cannot explain this and this must be divine" is one of the oldest reflexes of the human mind. The Serpent Whisperers didn't have supernatural power. They had knowledge that no one else had bothered to gather. And in a world of ignorance, knowledge alone can look exactly like a miracle. And the third is the part that stays with me. What truly set these men apart was not what they knew about the snake. It was what they had mastered about themselves. They learned to sit perfectly still inside the kind of fear that would freeze the rest of us solid. They turned terror into focus. And maybe that's the real secret worth keeping. long after the temples crumbled and the flutes went silent. The deadliest thing in that courtyard was never the cobra. It was panic, and they had simply learned not to feel it. So here's what I want to leave you with. We tend to call the things we can't explain magic, and the people who can do them gifted. But how many of history's so-called miracles do you think were really just someone who understood something the rest of the world hadn't figured out yet? Tell me what you think in the comments, and if this changed the way you see those snake charmers forever, you know what to do.